inside the 10. Carr dips it in and it's Ward. He spins into the end zone for the touchdown. Watching greatness on one end in LeBron. There's a dude with 35 in white getting it done defensively and then offensively taking over the fight. Mama, there goes that man.
They have shared a brilliant championship battle, but the championship can only be won by one, and it's going Dutch in 2021. Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Waterboy Experience. I am your host, the Waterboy himself, Davis McLemore, and boy, do we have a crazy show lined up for you today. It's time to play. Where in the world is Aaron Rodgers going to today? Where will Zeke eat now? Is Jimmy G the answer in Vegas? And how bad, just how bad, did Ferrari fuck up this weekend? Here to help me answer all of these questions and much more, it's the CEO and CFO of Nye Productions, the coolest of cats, the Red Bull chugging son of a gun, Mr. Jason Shaddix. Jason, how are you, my man?
Well, I'm not doing so well today. I'm hungry, and we've been running long, and I didn't have any notes. No, I'm just kidding. I'm doing pretty good. I am hungry, though, and I think Max Verstappen is going to be very hungry because we just watched qualifying, and whoa, he did not do so good.
No, he did not. But one person that did impress, I have to mention, was Fernando Alonso. I really thought he was going to get P1, but turns out it was Checo. Say it with me really quick. Vamos, Checo! Checo Perez has finished in P1 in the qualifying race, and he will start in pole position with Fernando Alonso right behind him and Carlos Sainz in P3.
Yes, you are correct. And I was almost about to correct you and say, no, it was Charles Leclerc, but you remember that he had a 10-place grid penalty.
Yes, so Charles Leclerc will now be starting in P12. So that's got to suck because he did really good in this qualifying, but because of course, the penalties of changing some kind of part, I don't know what part it was, I'll let you explain that. He's taking a 10-place grid penalty in this race. But he will start over, unfortunately, our boy Supermax, who will be starting in P15. Is that correct?
Yes. So unfortunately, Max had a problem with the drive shaft. And in free practice, either 2 or 3, he was actually complaining about shifting. When he was shifting down, the shift was holding on too much. So essentially, he wasn't shifting down as quick as possible. And apparently, this is an issue that plagued him until qualifying, where in Q2, he was going out for a run, and he never got to put a time in, and he was out, P15.
That is a shame, though. But also, we were talking about the scenario. If Checo can win this race and get the fastest lap, Checo Perez will currently be the number 1 spot in the driver standings championship. Is that true?
So that all hinges on the fact that Max Verstappen doesn't get a good finish. Now, we've seen Max do what he does best, and that's crawl up from the bottom of the grid to end up taking podium position or something like that. If you remember last year in Belgium, he ended up taking a grid penalty and he started in the back and he was just weaving through traffic. So everything has to go right for Checo in order for him to be ahead of Max Verstappen in the points. And, you know, Max could still get a good position and Checo could be ahead of him by a few points, like maybe 1 or 2. Now, I want to see if Checo can hold off Fernando Alonso because Fernando, like you said, P2, he's starting out and he's really quick. And that Aston Martin, man, that fucking Aston Martin, something else. Even Lance Stroll got P5. So, well, P4, I believe now because of Charles Leclerc's penalty. But regardless, I think Aston Martin's going to do really good. And I want to see if Fernando gets ahead of Checo Perez, then can Checo beat Fernando? Because Checo is the Minister of Defense, and in second place is Fernando Alonso. If you remember, and we actually saw this not too long ago, we were rewatching F1 highlights, and in Hungary, when in 2021, he was defending against Lewis Hamilton in a car that was way, way faster than that Alpine. And in this case, well, Fernando is in a better car. It's not as good as the Red Bull, but it's still a pretty damn fast car. So can Checo overtake Alonso in the case that Alonso overtakes him at the start of the race? That's the big question. And I'm curious to see, because I think we might actually get a really nice front runner fight. Well, unlike 2 weeks ago where Max Verstappen just took the lead and just ran off.
Well, and that won't be the case here, unfortunately. But we did talk about this last week, and we're seeing, a big jump in success for Fernando Alonso. We both agree that it's the car. He's in a much better car now. He's with a much more talented team. And Lance Stroll didn't do too bad in qualifying either. I'm not sure what place he's starting in. I think he's in the top 10 at least. So it's good for Lance Stroll because he's young. He's the future of Aston Martin. But right now, I believe this entire season, the story is going to be this is Fernando Alonso's last push for a world championship.
I think you're wrong in that regard. I think this is more like, can Aston Martin keep up? Because I talked about this in the post-production of the race review. It's awesome and all that Fernando Alonso is fighting for wins because he is a really talented driver. In the past, I've said that he's like Aaron Rodgers, and I even said, no, I'm wrong. He's way better because every driver, Sebastian Vettel, Michael Schumacher, when they raced in the later years, when people said they were past their primes, you could tell they were past their primes. But Fernando, it's like he never left his prime. He's still fast. So the thing is, can Aston Martin keep up development and keep up with the big boys? That's the big thing. And can they do it for this year? And then if not, can they do it next year? That's the big question. So I don't think this is his last push. I think that Aston Martin's going to be challenged and see if they can keep up with the Red Bulls, the Ferraris, and the Mercedes when it comes to this arms race to develop the fastest car before, you have to start developing next year's car. So that's what I'm thinking.
Well, hopefully we'll see how this race goes. We still have the race this past weekend to talk about. But first, we wanted to talk about some NFL news off the top of our heads. The Bears traded the number 1 overall pick to the Carolina Panthers for DJ Moore and 4 draft picks. Now, I want to ask you, do you think the Bears made the right call in sticking with Justin Fields at quarterback and giving away their number 1 draft pick?
It's fair to say that the Bears haven't been doing great the last few years. Am I right in that assumption?
You're very right, but one upside to the team is Justin Fields. I feel like he's very talented. It's a very young team. I think the average age on that team is like 27. So I think they are still trying to get things figured out. I think they're going to build this offense around Justin Fields. These 4 draft picks they're going to use on, fairly decent wide receivers, running backs, maybe offensive linemen to help protect him. But I still would have used this number 1 overall pick for the best receiver in the draft. It's not a very wide receiver eccentric draft, but, still just take the best available offensive player besides a quarterback for the first round pick. Now, the Panthers are somebody that are in need of a quarterback. So this pick will help them more than it would help the Bears. And I see them going CJ Stroud for the first overall pick in the draft.
Actually, you got my point because that's what I was going to say. I don't think it was going to help the Bears do anything because the problem isn't the players themselves. I mean, trust me, you could do with better players, but the problem is the team itself. That number 1 pick would have gone to shits if we were going to be honest. So the Panthers, they're trying to make some strides. So yeah, I do believe, like you said, it's right. You're right. They're gonna take better use of that number 1 overall pick. So that's what I think about that.
Yeah, and I mean DJ Moore, he's a veteran wide receiver. I feel like he can really help Justin Fields learn, and he'll be a great target for him for this season. Moving on to the next big shakeup, Aaron Rodgers. Where do you think he's going to go now? He's already confirmed he's going to sign with the New York Jets. Nothing's official yet, and we know how Aaron is. But yeah, what do you think about the New York Jets signing Aaron Rodgers?
Honestly, I think it's a mistake on their parts. Remember all last year when we were reviewing the NFL games, I was telling you, man, all of New York looks really fucking good. And I think this is a step back for them because Aaron Rodgers, we saw it. He's not that great. A lot of people say, well, he was great with Devontae. He just needs Devontae. And it's like, if you were a good fucking quarterback, you would be good regardless of who your wide receiver is. Granted, if you had a really terrible wide receiver, you can blame it on that person. But in this case, I think Aaron Rodgers is gone, and I think this is a bad move for the Jets. I'm happy for them to prove me wrong, but quite frankly, like I said, it's a bad move. I said it was a bad move if he was going to go to the Raiders when that rumor was going on, and it sucks for the MILF Hunter because around this time last year when we were doing the NFL draft, you and I both said, well, this kid looks like he's got something. This kid looks hot. So let's see how he goes. And at the beginning, he was doing pretty great. And then he got benched and it didn't work out. The kid, I think he has potential. I think he's a dumbass because he got benched for a reason. But signing Rodgers is really bad. I think they should have stuck to Flacco, right? That was the guy who, when he was out for the injury at the beginning of the season, Flacco was in. He wasn't doing too bad for a guy who was pretty old. He was playing pretty good. And I will say he did better and he will do better than Aaron Rodgers will this season.
I really think what they're setting up here is Aaron Rodgers, when he first started his career, he was in Green Bay and he sat behind Brett Favre for a few years. Now, when he first came into that game, Chris Collinsworth said something, they're not going to win very many football games with Aaron Rodgers starting at quarterback. And of course, they went on to win a Super Bowl, and you see what happened then. Now, I think that is what the Jets are going for here. I think they're going to keep Zach Wilson at quarterback, and they're going to put him on the bench, and they're just going to let him learn from Aaron. And I think that is one of the best things you can do. But you also need to make sure you're not paying Aaron Rodgers too much money because you have to think about what he's worth. Well, he's not your long-term starting quarterback. You're doing this to invest in Zach Wilson. So Aaron Rodgers has to be content with, hey, I'm not going to make a whole lot of money. This might be the last team I play with. Let's see what happens. And if, maybe they prove me wrong and he makes a Super Bowl run and, it's all great and fine and dandy. Well, eventually he has to go somewhere else or retire. Zach Wilson needs to be ready for that moment because like you said, we do see a lot of potential in Zach Wilson, but he's just very young and he makes a ton of rookie mistakes and he just needs to get experience, sit under the learning tree and just get better. I think in the long term for the Jets, that would be better.
But we both know that Aaron Rodgers is going to get paid a shit ton of money. You even said it earlier. It wouldn't surprise you if the Jets broke the record for the highest paid NFL quarterback or NFL player in NFL history. So that's a big issue. Another issue, and I'm going to ask you this because you sent me something about Zach Wilson not too long ago. Is he willing to learn? Can he put his ego aside?
That's going to be the big question. And I got to tell you, I don't know. If he's not willing to learn, okay, let him go. Find somebody else and let them learn under Aaron. The main thing that I'm more concerned about Aaron willing to teach somebody than Zach willing to learn. If you want to talk about egos in the NFL, you got to talk about Aaron Rodgers. He has one of the biggest egos in the NFL, and I'm really worried that he has that mentality of, I don't have to teach this kid anything. I don't know him anything. Zach Wilson's not going to learn anything. Aaron Rodgers is going to go there for maybe a year or two and then just leave, and then they're going to be left back where they started from. But that's the worst case scenario. Now, of course, the best case scenario, Aaron Rodgers, he teaches the kid, he learns, he's like, look, this is what you need to do. This is how we do it. Aaron Rodgers essentially helps revitalize that offense. And once he leaves, they're all set and they're taken care of. And then they can go on and be a much more successful team in the long run. That's what I think. So there was another quarterback turnaround. As we all know, Derek Carr is no longer the quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders. He signed with the Saints, which for the Saints, I think is a really good thing. For the Raiders, not so great. We were expecting to get somebody much better. But it looks like going forward, Jimmy Garoppolo from the 49ers is going to be our quarterback. He's injury prone. He's older. He's not that accurate. Yes, he's played for Josh McDaniels, but we know how Josh McDaniels is. If I think anybody in the league right now can make Josh McDaniels' offense look like it's supposed to, whatever he's trying to go for, if he can execute it like, hey, this is what he's trying to say here, I think it could be Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm not going to sit here and bash him because, he is talented, but is he an upgrade from Derek Carr? Talent-wise, not at all. And I think what we have done with also releasing Darren Waller, of course, he didn't get released. he got traded. We traded Darren Waller for a 3rd-round pick to the Giants, which was a dumb move. We could have got so much more out of him. For the Giants, that's a great deal because now Daniel Jones, he'll have his number one target. And if they want to run a, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce type offense, that's the perfect combination to do it with. And, outline your offense basically the same way the Chiefs do and then run that. But for the Raiders, it was not that great. It only released about $11 million in cap space, which I know people say is a lot. It's really not that much. But yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo is our quarterback going forward. Maybe we sign Anthony Richardson in the draft. I don't know. That's what we talked about this last week. That's my number one pick. Who should be the starting quarterback next year? And, we might not be, with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, we might not be good the next year. We might not even be good the next year. But if we start right now with somebody young, we'll have the talent and we'll be able to build on that and hopefully put together whatever kind of pieces we can from Josh McDaniels. If he wants to call it an offensive scheme, we can put together some pieces from it and make it work. But what do you think?
Well, first off, I have to say it's quite ridiculous what they're paying him. Jimmy's getting about 3 years for about $67.5 million with 34 guaranteed. If Jimmy takes one wrong hit the first game, he's not only got $34 million, but if he's out, like if they say, all right, you're done, you're not playing a single game of football ever again, what the fuck? You just spend a shit ton of money on this guy who, like you said, is he an upgrade to Derek Carr? Not really. I mean, I shit on Derek Carr a lot. I think he chokes a lot, and I think you could do better with a better quarterback. But at the same time, there's a reason why Jimmy was released by the 49ers. I don't think he's the right fit for the team, and I think the Raiders are just spending money in needless ways. I think it's like when Al Davidson was still in charge, and he was old and senile, and he was hiring all these people, and everybody was like, what the fuck is he doing? And if this is to work, if Josh McDaniels is to prove himself and prove everybody wrong, and I told you this, he's got to win a fucking Super Bowl. He's got to win this year's Super Bowl to prove that, yeah, it's working. What I'm doing is working, because he was already a head coach before he came to the Raiders, and he didn't do good at it. I think he is just, and you've said this, he is somebody who, yes, he was in the team with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, but he was just a spare prick at the wedding. I don't think he's that good as a coach. Last year definitely showed that he's not a good coach at all. So I think it's bad. And, maybe what the Raiders are trying to do, and I still think it's a lot of money, is they get that kid, what was his name?
Anthony Richardson.
Well, maybe they get Anthony and they sit him under Jimmy and be like, all right, you're going to watch him and you're going to learn from Jimmy and he's going to teach you how to do this shit. Maybe that's the end game. Again, I still don't think they should have gotten Jimmy, because if he takes one hit in the wrong way, he's out. He's injury prone. He's like Tua, except Tua, when he's healthy, he can play. Jimmy, on the other hand, I just don't see it.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Anthony Richardson and Jimmy Garoppolo are nothing alike. They have two completely different playing styles. Maybe it's about learning the system. And I can tell you right now, 3 years, $67.5 million with $34 million guaranteed, that's not sitting on the bench money. That's starting money. They're looking at this guy to be the starter for the next 3 years. I really don't I don't think they're going to go for Anthony Richardson in the draft. I think they're going to stick with Jimmy Garoppolo, because I think Josh McDaniels wants to sign his friends. We saw it. And we signed Jacoby Myers, who, can I remind you, do you remember last year that game when we won it on the last play? It was a go-home touchdown. And, Jacoby Myers tried to do a flea flicker and threw it right to Chandler Jones, and Chandler Jones stiff-armed Mac Jones into oblivion. We signed that guy. That's my biggest question. How do you watch that play? You watch that guy just throw it straight to Chandler Jones, and you think, oh, we need to sign that guy. We've got to do everything we can to get him. No, what it is Josh McDaniels wants to sign the people that he knows, the people that he know will listen to him and what he wants to do. Derek Carr didn't really want to listen to him. So what was the most convenient option when he wanted to put the blame on why the team wasn't winning? Bench Carr. Make it look like Carr is the problem. Now what's going to happen is Carr's going to go over to New Orleans And we've tried the Dennis Allen, Derek Carr combo before. It didn't work out. But he has a lot more weapons over there in New England, and I think they could have success. And what we're going to see is he's going to have success, and everybody's going to turn around and look at Josh McDaniels like, you gave that guy up? And then Darren Waller's going to go to the New York Giants, and he's going to do what he does best, and he's going to be the best tight end in the league. I fully believe that that's what's going to happen. So we'll see, but the way things are going right now, I don't know how you walk in to free agency. Maybe it's too early to call because it's still going on. It's still hot. And we're going to see players' prices are going to go down the longer free agency goes. And so maybe we'll wait until that final moment where everybody's price is cheap enough to where we can just sign a bunch of guys and just sign them to contracts, 2-year deals, and all kinds of stuff. But it doesn't look great. And it looks like we walked in to this year's free agency with the third most cap space, and we've made the team worse than what it was before. I'm cautiously pessimistic about this because I don't want to say it's a bad idea, because part of me still wants to trust the process, because that part of me has been trusting the process for the past 15 years and nothing's happened. Anyway, that was our NFL talk for the day. What about the race? What about the Formula One race this weekend?
Well, I got to watch it first because we're recording this before. That's a new thing. But I will say this, and I almost forgot about this. Kimi Räikkönen is going to come back to NASCAR once again at COTA, which is the Circuit of the Americas, and so will former F1 champion Jenson Button. He will be at COTA, and I think he will be at Atlanta. Don't quote me on that one. But I'm really excited to see what Kimi can do, because last year he was doing pretty good for somebody who hasn't raced in NASCAR, at least at the Cup Series, at a high level in a while. He did a little stint in truck racing back in 2012, I want to say, and he did pretty okay, but he was running pretty good this last year, and unfortunately, he got taken out. I can't remember if he got taken out. There was something like somehow his car was on the side of the road, but you know, COTA, that was his last race that he ever won. And that's with Ferrari back in 2018. He knows the track. He knows the layout. I'm not sure what the layout is for NASCAR, but I'm pretty sure there are corners that he knows of. And he knows the limit of that track. So maybe he can win a race or maybe get high in NASCAR. And this is just a one-off appearance. So, I don't know. I'm just excited to see Kimi race again. And I really want to see him. And I want to see what Jenson can do, because Jenson's a pretty good racing driver. So, yeah.
I wanted to ask you this. We were talking about it a little bit earlier, but we kind of just raced around, for lack of a better term, we kind of raced around the subject. What's going on with NASCAR having more street races?
I think, and this isn't like what NASCAR says, but I think it's because they're trying to see what Formula One is doing. Formula One is becoming very popular in the United States. And I think the main reason why is because people are bored of NASCAR. NASCAR is oval track racing. And how many laps can you see of that before you're like, oh, fuck, what the fuck? And I know people complain, well, in Formula One, you know, Max Verstappen, he's always winning the race, or Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, that's the case in recent years, but you still get some good track action. You might not see the leaders fight, but Bahrain showed that, well, it doesn't have to be the leaders that are fighting to give us a good show. Fernando Alonso gave us a hell of a show in Bahrain, so, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, the front runners. It'd be nice, it'd be like 2021, but that's more the exception than the norm. But it's still, I think they're just trying to grasp at what Formula One is doing, because there is a need for motorsport racing in the United States. IndyCar racing isn't that popular. I do like some of the races, and they can be quite exciting, but when it's oval, not so much. When it's street, oh, fuck yeah, I love that. So I think NASCAR is just trying something different. They always try something different. Most of the time, it doesn't work out for them, but maybe ovals are going the way of the dinosaur. Hopefully, you know, not just street tracks, but like actual tracks are going to be in NASCAR's calendar, because, hey, you got to do more than just make a left turn.
And I think another thing we're seeing in Formula One is we're seeing a shift from where Mercedes was dominant. Lewis Hamilton, you know, we were used to him winning all the time, every race, all that kind of stuff. We're seeing a power shift here where we're seeing a bunch of young talent that could be potential world champions like Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris. But of course, you know, given the right circumstances, given the right car, I think those guys could all be world champions. Max Verstappen, of course, has won back-to-back years the past 2 years, and I think it's refreshing. It's, it's exciting to see, Lewis Hamilton isn't doing that hot, but he's always going to be a threat on the grid because, he's one of, if not the greatest driver of all time. I think that's the reason why it's getting so exciting, and that's why we're seeing the popularity grow in the States, is because the sport itself is shaken up. We're seeing a lot of different characters, a lot of different great talented racers, and things are getting tight now. So it's more of a toss-up now than it was in previous years where everybody just kind of took it for granted. Lewis Hamilton was the world champion. So,
and I think we're seeing the effects of the regulations change, because that was the point where they were supposed to bring the pack back together. That's why we have cost caps. That's why we have restrictions to wind tunnels and stuff like that, because they want the racing to be closer. And while the racing isn't closer when it comes to the front runners, because quite easily I can say Max Verstappen is the world champion for this year. I don't see anybody stopping him. But in the midfield, it's all becoming more bunched up. We saw Williams get into points and one Williams almost get to the points. We're seeing the back markers catch up, and we're seeing that the teams at the front just can't waste away millions of dollars to fix their issues like Mercedes would have done in the past. Because if we didn't have the cost cap and we didn't have the restrictions on the wind tunnels and all that, I can assure you Mercedes would have thrown hundreds of millions of dollars into the wind tunnel to figure out what was the problem with the W13. Or was it the 12? I can't even fucking remember anymore. But we're going to see in the next few years that gap at the front close up, and we're going to see more close racing actions. And yeah, it is changing. And I know a lot of people are like, yeah, we're going to have to wait until 2026 for things to really change up. But I think as the years go by, we're going to see Formula One be more closer, be more, I don't want to say spec series race like NASCAR, but we're going to see them instead of, like I said, throwing money into it, we're going to see people get more creative. And that's the thing. So you're right. There is a change. And I think NASCAR missed the bus. I think they're going to have to do a lot to evolve. And they're going to have to change a lot of rules that they've kept for the last 20, 30 years in order to become popular again. Because at the end of the day, Formula One is still more popular worldwide than NASCAR is, even in the States alone. So plus, come on. Fucking 200 something laps of going in circles, for crying out loud. Look, I love Formula One, but if they did that, I would not watch. I would definitely not watch.
Well, I guess from here we're going to go on. We're going to do our little magic trick here, and in a moment you're going to hear Jason's review of the Formula One race. So we're going to go off the air real quick, and then we'll be right back, and Jason will give you the basic rundown because he's not ready right now. So he's not a very prepared man, but we'll be right back. I'll give you a little fancy noise to know that it's coming. We can add that in post-production, can't we? A little edit note?
No, we are certainly not going to add fancy noise.
All right. So here's Jason with the race review.
All right, and we're back with the race review. Now, first off, I do have to apologize if I do sound a little bit drowsy. It is midnight and I am quite tired, so I'm just going to try to get through this race review as quick as possible, but without leaving any of the important juicy details. So right off the back, I do have to mention, and I think we mentioned this earlier in today's episode, but Max Verstappen only managed P15 because during Q2, he had a drive shaft issue that prevented him from actually putting in a fast lap. So Max started pretty low on the grid and he had to fight his way up throughout the entire race, which, spoiler, it was quite quickly. So in Q3, that meant that pole position was up for grabs. And being a street track and Checo somehow becoming the king of the street tracks, he got pole position. Now, when the cars were lining up for the start of the race, there's this thing where they have to park inside this grid box that they call. And there's this tape that runs around the top of the grid box, not at the edge of the top, but just at the top. And drivers really want to put their tires right at that position because it gives you the optimal race start. Now, the reason I mention this is because, one, Checo Perez was about a half a tire length, maybe an entire tire length behind that optimal race start line in the grid box. Now, he's not getting a penalty for that, but who did get a penalty for this, and we didn't find this out until lap 2 or 3, was Fernando Alonso. He was a little bit too much to the left, like his entire wheels were over the grid box. So he got a 5-second time penalty, similar to how his former teammate Esteban Ocon got one in the season opener. And it wasn't like Esteban's where you could be like, well, it's right on the edge of the grid box and stuff like that. No, this one was completely out of the grid box. And if you see the onboard from, I do believe he was either Charles Leclerc or Carlos Sainz, one of the Ferraris, you could clearly see just a big gap on the right side of the grid box because just Fernando was way too much to the left. Now, when the race starts, Fernando, because he was at the optimal line, even though he was a little bit to the left, he got a better start than Checo, and he actually beat Checo into turn 1. But a few laps later, specifically lap 4, Checo passes Fernando for P1, and Fernando essentially just tries to keep everybody behind him, and quite frankly, he's got a bit of a head start compared to everybody else, so everybody's just mostly trying to catch up to Checo. Now, during the first lap, I think during turn 13, Lance Stroll, his teammate, passes Carlos Sainz, and Oscar Piastri has front wing damage and is forced to pit. Now, this is, again, very interesting. Now, I've always said Lance isn't as great as Fernando, and I kind of still agree with that point, but that car is tremendously fast, and again, this is another sign that the Ferraris are falling back. Aston Martin completely just went by the Ferraris. Now, unfortunately for Lance Stroll, he had a little bit of an issue. Around lap 6 or 7, I want to say, he started to develop an engine issue. According to later reports, while it's not exactly known at the time of recording what the issue was, they do theorize it was the energy recovery system, and it was costing Lance a few seconds per lap, and they noticed this around lap 6 or 7. And what happened was, after Lance pitted, it was almost like, Lance, you got to stop the car, and he pulls over, and by the way, his car was smoking a little bit, but Lance had to pull the car over, and here's the interesting part. He pulled the car into an area where the marshals could easily get access to the car and push it into a safe area where, no car is going to hit it or anything like that. And you would think at the very least, or at the very most, that would be a virtual safety car. But apparently the FIA decided that was enough to warrant a full-on safety car. And when that happened, Lance had actually pitted a little bit before Fernando. So when the safety car hits, they tell Fernando, hey, go into the pits. So Fernando goes into the pits. He serves his 5-second time penalty. They put on his tires, and then he leaves, and he basically stays in P2, which, you know what? That was a stroke of luck. Now, I do want to mention this. It's not really a big part of the race. It was just a little brief thing. But on lap 12, Max Verstappen, going through the straight, passes Lewis Hamilton. This isn't anything. It wasn't a big fight or any of that. Quite frankly, Lewis had to let him go by because that Red Bull was so fast. But that brings up another issue, and that's the Mercedes. Neither of the Mercedes were as quick as they were in Bahrain. And during interviews this past week, Lewis Hamilton has been complaining about the car. And the thing about Lewis is that he's struggling more than George Russell. And here's something very interesting that somebody commented on one of the posts that one of these news sites did. And they said, well, I think kind of the reason why Lewis is struggling is because he's been at Mercedes for so long, and he's had a car which has basically been built around him, or has been given his recommendations on, we should do this to the car so it drives a little bit better. And George Russell, on the other hand, has been driving a Williams, a shitbox. So he's used to dealing with a car that is tricky to handle, that doesn't work the way you want. And this person said, well, I think that's why Lewis is struggling right now. And another thing that I might add, and I will talk to Davis about this in next week's episode, is Toto Wolff was talking about, well, Lewis, I would love to see, I'm paraphrasing by the way, I would love to see him win an 8th world championship, but he might have to leave the team in order to do that as he's getting older. And I thought that was interesting because he was asked that question in regards to, well, will Lewis re-sign with Mercedes as his contract is up? And he said, yes, we're right now talking about the contract dealings. And then they asked him about his 8th world championship. And he's like, well, the way things are going, we don't know if, we can provide a car quick enough for Lewis to win an 8th world championship. And he might have to go to another team. So I thought that was just a very interesting little thing that was mentioned. I don't know what to make of it, but that is very interesting because Toto in the past would always say, well, we don't know yet. We would love for Lewis to stay on the team, or Lewis is staying on the team for a while. But this time he's coming out and saying, we would be sad to lose him if he has to move on for another team so he can win that world title. But yeah. And it also says, oh shit, they know that this car is a piece of shit and they don't know if they can fix it. Or fixed it in time. So like I said, that was just a fun little thing that I saw and I thought it might be interesting to share. Now, let's go to Ferrari because Ferrari did something under the safety car that is just so much like Ferrari. So what am I talking about? Well, Charles Leclerc was behind Lewis Hamilton at this point. So Lewis goes into the pits, he comes out, and he's ahead of Charles Leclerc. And Charles is right behind Lewis. That's when his engineer goes on the radio and tells Charles, we need you to push for safety line car, something. Essentially, you can push under the safety car when somebody's coming out of the pits because it doesn't count as an overtake, because if you're pitting, it's different and all that, and the car passes you outside the pits and all that mumbo jumbo. But Charles goes to his engineer and he's like, dude, you have to tell me earlier. What the hell? So again, Ferrari doing Ferrari, and team principal Fred Vasseur was interviewed and he said, can't be doing this shit. We have to figure out what the fuck is going on with the team, which is quite interesting because Mattia Binotto and pretty much almost every Ferrari team principal before him would always say, well, we got a good car. We just, we got to figure out what's going on. And he's like, no, there's something wrong with the team and we got to fucking figure it out. Like, he's putting the blame on the team, which is rightfully so. Last year, Mattia Binotto was saying, well, Charles is good. The car is good. The strategy team is good. I don't know what we really have to do except develop the car. And everybody was like, no, the strategy team has been shit. That's what everybody says. There's an entire meme going around about the Ferrari team looking like a bunch of clowns. So there we go. Ferrari never ceases to be Ferrari. So on lap 25, Max Verstappen passes Fernando Alonso for P2. Now, what becomes interesting from here is we all thought, well, Max is going to pass Checo and he's going to win the race. Actually, they told Checo, hey, Max is behind you. There's a 5-second gap. And Checo kept that 5-second gap up. And at certain points, they were telling him, okay, Checo, we need you to go at this type of speed. And he goes, are you telling Max to do the same thing? And they actually said, no, Max is doing something a little bit different. And he's like, well, why are you telling me to slow down for a little bit? And, Checo just kept the pace up. And at one point, Max goes, hey, what's the fastest lap? And they tell him, Max, we're not worried about that right now. And he goes, well, I am. So I'm not saying there's a lot of trouble going on between the two Red Bull drivers and like no rivalry going on. I think it's just a friendly rivalry at this moment. I don't think it's completely like some people are making it out to be that Checo is on his own and Red Bull want to fuck him over and Max is pissing. I think it's just a friendly rivalry. And at the end of the day, Checo ended up winning the race and Max was still 5 seconds behind him, which quite astonishing considering that Checo is usually quite behind him. But he's getting more used to the car because the Red Bull has always been a little bit tricky to drive because Max likes a rear end that is very loose. And at the front of the car, he likes it to be very pointy. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense without visuals, but just think about it like this. when a Formula One car, specifically this type of Formula One car, the 2022 new ranked Formula One cars, but they have this bad quirk where they understeer a lot. So when you turn, the car isn't turning like you want it to be. And Max loves a car that turns exactly like he wants it to be. And the rears might, dance a little in the back. You know what I'm saying? So Max loves that type of car. And Checo, he hasn't really driven that type of car, as Red Bull are mostly the ones who do that. But it looks like Checo is finally figuring out this car and is able to, drive it pretty fast. But in the end, Checo thought he had the fastest lap, but Max took it away on the final lap, which incidentally, if Checo would have kept the fastest lap, he would have become the first Mexican to be at the top of the world championship since 1960, when one of the Rodriguez brothers held that honor. So fortunately, Max took that fast lap and Checo's just behind by a single point. And I don't know about the rivalry between Ferrari and Red Bull, but it's going to be very interesting to see Checo versus Max at Australia next 2 weeks, I believe. Now, Fernando Alonso got a 10-second time penalty because when he pitted to serve his time penalty of 5 seconds, the rear jackman placed the jack under the car, actually touched it. Did not lift it, just it was touching it. Well, we don't know if it was touching it. It was like the camera, even if it got a little bit close of a zoom in, you really couldn't tell because it's dark under the car. But he got a 10-second time penalty, and unfortunately, they took away his P3, which that's what he got, and gave it to George Russell. Only for a few hours later for the FIA to reinstate Alonso's P3. Basically, the whole argument was, well, you have to place the rear jack under the car so, it's all stable, because they allow the front jack to touch the car. You can't lift it up, of course, but they allow it to touch it so it can be a guide. And they went back and forth, and eventually Aston Martin got their way and he got a P3, which even George Russell said, I didn't deserve it. I didn't drive as well as Fernando. And everybody agreed, Fernando was the man who deserved P3, which again, impressive. Fernando managed to get another podium, 2 podiums for Aston Martin. But yeah, it was just a bit of controversy, and a lot of people were saying, oh, come on, FIA. It's only 2 races in. Can you not fuck this up? Are you seriously going to do a Ferrari? God. But anyway, Checo won the race. Max P2, Fernando Alonso P3. Overall, it was a pretty nice race. It wasn't really the greatest race I've seen, or I won't say it's the best race of the season, but it was pretty entertaining. And this is the second race that Davis has fully watched. He's seen like the highlights and the clips and all that, but usually he was at work or he was doing something and he couldn't watch it. So today he managed to get some free time and watched the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which is great. But anyway, take it away, white boy.
Thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Waterboy Experience, and peace.
Second and goal just outside the 10. Carr tips it in, and it's Waller. He spins into the end zone for the touchdown.